Oh, hang on.
It says it's now broadcasting.
Yep.
Oh, people are coming in. Participants.
Oh, that's Michelle, another interpreter. You're on mute, Michelle.
Michelle's
Did you know
in
that?
there.
You're on mute. There you go. Hello.
Oh, wow. Okay. Hello, everyone that's coming in. Hello. I'm saying hello to you now. Hopefully you can all hear me. Okay. Oh, good. People are attending. Hello, everybody. So my name's Joe Sedgwick. I work for the Literary Consultancy. I am our editorial services manager, and I'm sort of stepping in for Aki Schilz, who was meant to be leading this today, but she's having some technical difficulties, as you may have noticed. She's not really with us, although she is in spirit. I'm going to wait a couple more. Minutes just to see who else logs in, because it looks like people are slowly trickling through. And we'll kick off properly. I'll do proper introductions in a moment. This is quite exciting. So we haven't done one of these before.
I've got Aki on my screen 3 times.
Oh, what a joy!
Before I couldn't get her once, so now I've got her 3 times.
I do.
Can never have too much.
Can't have too much, Aki.
So yeah, we're getting a few emails from people saying that they are getting in now.
Joe, I've managed to log in on my phone. Would you like me to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, you can do an intro if you want, yeah.
Welcome everybody. My name is Aki Schilz. I'm the director of the Literary Consultancy. I do apologise for my shoddy video quality. I'm having to log in on my phone because my laptop keeps chucking me out of Zoom. This is the very first TLC webinar. It's Meet the Editors in partnership with the Publishing Training Centre, and we are so excited to welcome you all here tonight. Hopefully you can all manage to log in and join us, but don't worry if not. We are recording this webinar and we will be releasing the audio files to everybody who signed up to participate following the webinar. Please note that also joining us, we have 2 British Sign Language interpreters. Those are the other 2 people whose videos you can see currently up on screen. They will be interpreting everything we say. So we are going to try, wherever possible, to speak as clearly and slowly as we can to make life a little bit easier for our BSL interpreters who are interpreting for our deaf and hard of hearing guests with us tonight. A very warm welcome to you all. Joe, would you like me to try and do this from my phone?
If you want, I'm happy to take over and sort of do the questions and the asking and things.
Right,
if that's easier for you.
What I can do, shall I introduce our guests? And then I'll hand over to my colleague Joe Sedgwick. Joe, give us a wave.
Hello, everyone.
That's Joe. He's our editorial services manager here at TLC. And what he will be doing is hosting the panel discussion with our panelists. We'll be chatting for about 20, 30 minutes or so. There's no need for this to be a really, really long event. As a general rule of thumb, virtual events should be probably about half the time of an in-person event. So we're going to keep this as short and sweet as possible. You all have the ability to join us on the chat function if you have any questions along the way as participants in this webinar. Please do use the chat function. There is an interactive Q&A at the end. If you have a question for a particular panelist in the chat, please clearly designate when you write question 4 and the name of the panelist. We'll be keeping a log of all of your questions and we can answer them all at the end in the open Q&A, and there will be the opportunity for people to hopefully to ask their questions on video and audio as well, but we'll do that once we've had the panel discussion ably hosted by Joe. So to start with, I'm just going to introduce our panelists with their short potted biographies, and then I'll be handing over to Joe for the panel discussion. But thank you so much everyone for joining us. So joining us tonight, and when I say your name, if you could just give us a wave on the video so we can see who you are. We have Becky Alexander. Becky, give us a wave, please.
Hi, hello there, everybody.
This is Becky. She has worked as a managing and commissioning editor for Penguin, Bloomsbury, HarperCollins and Cowland Brown. She works as freelance as a managing editor, and we'll talk about what that means, and senior editor for Penguin and other companies specialising in high-profile non-fiction from food to feminism. Also on our panel, we have Louise Harnby. Louise, would you give us a wave?
Hello.
There's Louise. Louise is a freelance fiction editor and a bit of a celebrity in the editing world with 30 years of publishing experience. She works with independent, so self-publishing authors and specialises in crime fiction, thrillers and mysteries. She has proofread for 25 publishers. I won't read them all out because it would take me all night. And is an advanced professional member of the Chartered Institute for Editors and Proofreaders, which I'm sure will come up in our discussion. And is a partner member of the Alliance of Independent Authors, where we are also a partner at TLC. And Louise also offers brilliant training for editors and proofreaders, so if you haven't checked her out already, do have a look at her website. Also joining us is Shreeta Shah. Shreeta, would you like to give us a wave?
Hi everyone.
There's Shreeta. Shreeta is a copy editor at Puffin, Penguin Random House Children's. She's worked in television until her career breakthrough brought her to the Bath Spa Creative Writing MA, which was the same MA that I was on 10 years ago now, where she discovered her love of words and working directly with authors. One of the great joys of editing is your direct work with authors, which I'm sure we'll also talk about in our panel discussion. Shreeta trained as a proofreader and worked as a freelance editor before joining Puffin Books, and she works on a range of non-fiction and fiction books. And those are our panellists. Hopefully that's a good introduction, although they are multifaceted, all of them, and do much more than I've described. And I'm going to hand over to Joe and for our panel discussion.
Yeah, okay. So hello everyone. Thanks for the intros, Aki. So I'm going to go
You introduce yourself also, Joe.
Oh, okay. Well, my name is Joe Sedgwick. I'm the editorial services manager at TLC. I've been working at TLC for about 5 years now. I started off as an intern and then I've sort of hung around and been working my way up there. And now I kind of oversee our core services, our editorial services, our mentoring scheme, and our marketing strategies. And I'm really happy to be here with all of you virtually. Thank you so much for all logging in and being here. I'll get us kicked off with quite an open-ended question, because I think that's kind of a nice way for you to sort of introduce yourselves and discuss your work a bit more in your own words. And I kind of really would like to know from each of you in turn, if you could just sort of say a couple of lines or a few minutes, just talk about why editing? Why are you an editor, and what is it that inspires you about editing? And maybe Louise, if we could start with you.
Yeah. So for me, I think this partially relates to my freelance status as well. I really like being in control of I like editing as a job because I like the nitty-gritty of particularly sentence level work. That's my thing. That's my wheelhouse. But I really like the fact that I'm in control. Like, I worked in house for several years and had a wonderful time there. But I love being sort of in control of my own workspace, and I really like being able to work directly with authors. I think, someone said that before. It's just that ability to sort of help someone, particularly if they're at the beginning of their journey, and you can see the magic in their work, but it's not quite there, and you can just see how you can make it, just raise it above the bar and make it pop, and help them grow. I mean, I've got some clients who I've worked with on several books now, and I can see them growing as a writer all the time. So that's, for me, that's kind of what makes me, that's where I get a kick from, that finding the magic and then helping bring it to the surface.
Fantastic. Maybe Becky?
Hi. I think for me, I mostly work in non-fiction, and one of the things I love about editing is I learn something with every single book. With non-fiction, for a company like Penguin, it's very much trend-led. So the books I've been editing this year have been about well-being, about women, about feminism, about all sorts of things. And every single book I learn something, and I feel quite privileged to be there when these authors who are at the top of their game are sharing, you know, often their life's work, and I get to read it. I'd be one of the first people to read it, and I absolutely love that. I've just been working with an amazing author whose book is called Fearless. I mean, it's so appropriate for now. It's just amazing about how you embrace life. So that's fantastic. Really good fun. Never boring. So that's what I like about editing.
Fantastic. And Shreeta?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of slightly echoing what Louise and Becky have said, but I think editing is a brilliant thing to do if you love learning, full stop. I mean, you never stop learning, whether it's through the content that you're editing or learning more about editing more efficiently. You know, there's so many different strands of learning involved. And I have always loved working with authors. I think when I did my Baths by MA, I wasn't really expecting anything to come out of it, but the main thing that came for me was just seeing authors grow from the feedback that you've given them is just an incredible privilege. I really, really enjoyed that aspect. And now I get to work with incredible authors who, you know, pushed out lots of books over very many decades, and it's incredible to see that process. So yeah, I think both those things are what draw me to it.
Great, that's really fantastic. We're having some people, I think, having trouble getting on, but we are recording this, so we'll make sure it's disseminated to everyone widely afterwards. I just thought I'd sort of say that now before we go any further.
I also
but hopefully people will log in.
We've also had a question about speaker versus gallery view. So within Zoom, you are able to change that yourself, the setting, whether you see the person talking, that speaker view, or whether you see everybody all together. So to switch your view, I think you go to the top right of your screen, of your Zoom screen. There should be an option to switch between speaker or gallery view. The view you would ideally have is gallery view, and that will enable you to see everybody all at once rather than only the person who's speaking. So you get a visual on all of our speakers at the same time.
Yes, as Aki says. So my next question is a kind of, I'm not sure which of you might be best to explain this, but maybe you can sort of decide amongst yourselves. What kinds of editing are there? There are obviously different types of editing. I think a lot of people maybe don't realize or don't quite understand the different variations of types of editing. And I was just wondering if one or all of you might want to explain what kinds of editing there are and in what ways those are carried out.
I don't mind taking that to start. If you
Sure, yeah.
So I tend to divide it into 4, although one thing I would caveat that with is that if you're, for anybody listening who's thinking of going into the indie author market, the indie fiction author market anyway. No, actually that's not true. The indie author market full stop. Our definitions, and certainly the definitions that publishers use, often don't fit with their understanding. So, but I divide it into developmental or structural editing, which is like big picture work, and then line or editing or stylistic work, which is sentence level work, but it's working at line level rather than looking at big picture stuff like, for fiction, characterization or pacing or plot. It's to do with flow and rhythm and texture. And then copy editing I tend to think of as more the sort of technical correction, meticulous and precise attention to detail, and then proofreading as that final quality control stage. But the reason I caveated the whole thing was because I get authors coming to me going, I just need a final proofread. I've been through it, and actually, you know, there's viewpoint drops all over the place. There's plot holes. There's the sentence structure is poor, or it's repetitive, or it doesn't flow well. The dialogue tags are wrong. So the way we often as professionals define these services don't necessarily translate well into the wider world.
And I think that's one of the roles of the editor, isn't it? To have a clear vision of what the different steps are and how parametered they are, and actually what we can bring. So we're talking here about a scheme for aspiring editors. What we can bring is a certain sense of professionalism to that process. The production process is still a production process, whether you're in a traditional publishing house or whether you're a self-publishing author. And professionalizing that process also depends on editors who understand where their skills lie. And so that's, you know, the training that we're offering through this scheme, and the training that you offer, Louise, also through your brilliant website. You know, part of this offer is having people understand what that means. And we recently had a workshop with Caroline Knight at the PTC. Brilliant, because it really showed, I think, the attendees that there's so much work that goes into it's just copy editing. Well, is it? What does that really mean?
Yeah.
And
taking that out to the wider world as well, making sure that our clients understand that, so that so we're not just educating ourselves and people coming into that community, but the people who we work for need to understand what it means and try and get a better idea of what they want, what they need.
Absolutely.
Just to give another angle, obviously I agree with everything Louise is saying. She mentioned how a publishing company might view it. So if anyone's listening in thinking, I'd like to apply for a job as an editor, maybe I could just run through a couple of the main job titles and how that fits together. So at somewhere like Penguin, we would have, at the top would be a commissioning editor, and they are very much running the business. They're in charge of deciding what books they're going to buy, how much they pay for them. At that point, they might employ a structural editor, a senior editor, someone like Louise, to shape the book. It might be a brilliant idea. It might not be quite ready yet. They might work with a managing editor, which is the job I've done for Bloomsbury, Penguin and HarperCollins. And a managing editor sometimes just takes the book and looks after it, basically. As soon as it's commissioned, the managing editor looks after it. They'll work closely with the author. They might take on a structural editor, a copy editor, later a proofreader, in-house or freelance, depending on the schedule. So a managing editor might look after anything between 8 to 25 books a year for that company. And then within that department, you may also have an in-house desk editor or a project editor. It depends. Different companies use different terms, but they're often doing the same thing. If you were applying for a job, you just have to read the job description and think, where do I fit in with this? Where am I with my level of experience? They might also have an assistant editor who will be doing all sorts, maybe some copy editing, maybe some sending books out to authors, picture research, all sorts of things. So those are the sort of main areas. Above all that, you might have like a publishing director, and authors might say in the back of their book, oh, I thank my editor. But in a way, that's almost the person who sort of gave them the sort of yes, the commissioning editor. They might not ever really pick up a pen or change the spelling or do anything, but they have that lovely personal relationship. So within there, you know, a commissioned author might deal with many, many editors. So anyway, I hope that helps. It sort of fits together, hopefully.
No, it's brilliant, Becky. Thank you. Joe, I'm realising I'm kind of ramroding here and taking over the panel discussion somewhat.
No, go ahead. It's fine, yeah.
Would it be all right as well, because I'm on my phone, if perhaps you can keep a track of people raising hands, people asking questions, and kind of gather those? And can I ask you to come in with that once we've had this discussion? That'd be amazing, because I don't have that facility, unfortunately. Yeah, brilliant.
Sure.
So talking about managing editors, so this is something that I wasn't aware existed as a role until I first worked in non-fiction publishing and worked under a managing editor. Shreeta, I know this is one of the really nice things about getting to speak to experts directly is we never really understand. We might see a job description, but understanding the actual day-to-day is really interesting and is something that we'd love to have an insight on. So Shreeta, for you, could you take us through a kind of typical, if there indeed is such thing, day for a managing editor specifically?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't a typical day. There's an awful lot of plates spinning the whole time. So generally what I'll do is I'll be working on several books at one time. They're all at different stages. And what I'm doing is shepherding the book, almost midwifing the book through those last stages. So that can have you liaising with people like in the marketing department because they want to put a book proof out. It can have you liaising with editors on sort of matters more to do with the text itself. And what it really involves is making sure that the work is as the author wants it. You know, it all becomes very real at the stage that I'm working on it. The text is set and there's only a certain amount that can be done with it. And you're also liaising with a lot of different designers and other stakeholders who have a say in what shape the work takes. So I don't know if there's anything more specific you want me to drill into there.
Shreeta, can I ask you something? Are you the person also who's in charge of, if you bring in freelancers, are you the person who handles that as well, who manages all of that?
Yeah. So we have our copy editors, our proofreaders, and yeah, I'm liaising with them a lot of the time. Yeah. So it's keeping things on track, to schedule, to budget, is the main aspect of what I do, I suppose, and also making decisions on styling and so forth, making sure that everything is as consistent and readable as it can be, and age appropriate in the case of children's as well.
Yeah, certainly when I'm just managing editor, it was definitely me, the managing editor, who would book all the freelancers.
It's one of the questions that I'm most often asked by new entrants to the field, like, if you want to work with publishers, who do you ask for? And I often say, you know, well, there's loads of different titles, but you know, that's one of them. So
And actually, I would be interested. So at TLC, we the editing that TLC offers as a company is all developmental, all substantive. So the assessment service that we provide is appraisals, it's feedback, it's kind of, you know, literary editing, although not line editing, but we can go back into that later. But what a managing editor will do is work with professional freelance copy editors and proofreaders, and they are always needed across various specialisms. Now, in terms of selecting them, I would really love to hear a little bit about, you know, what do you look for in an ideal freelancer? Because I think for those people who are thinking maybe of becoming freelance editors and offering their services, they might be thinking, not only how do I get in, but how do I present myself as best I can? What are the things you look for? What makes a good freelancer to you to work with? And then I'm going to ask Louise to kind of talk a little bit more about her side of things as well.
I can tell you what I was looking for when I was at Bloomsbury. I would, if I'm trying to choose a freelance editor, I would go for somebody with as much experience as possible. And I know that's catch-22 if you're starting out, but if they're an expert in their area, so they could be a former teacher, someone with a history background, a science background. I had to find somebody who was a midwife. You know, I do want experts in their area. That's actually a real asset, because I mean, certainly if we're talking to people who are changing career, their experience can be incredibly valuable. I would prioritize people who have worked in-house before. For example, at Bloomsbury, we would get CVs all the time from potential freelance editors. And if they have got some experience in-house, that will put you ahead. And I know that's a real pain to hear if you're just starting out. But experience in other fields, and if you've had your own clients, if you've managed to be entrepreneurial and find your own clients, or worked through a good agency, I'm open to that as well. Sometimes,
so really having a good sense of your own transferable skills then is pretty valuable.
And I would say technical skills. I would say some of my more experienced editors are a bit behind with some of their skills. So if you are able to edit on a PDF, or you know, InDesign, and all of these things. That's really, really helpful.
And Louise, talking of these skills, because I know you offer training, but also you once started somewhere yourself. So how did you find that, I guess, on both sides? How did you find that when you were starting out, and what have you learned that's helped you pass, you know, useful tips on for people that you train up now?
So what Becky said absolutely chimes with me. That's exactly the approach that I took when I was a new entrant to the field. And I did, the first type of client I tried to get was publishers, because they're probably publishers and project management agencies and packagers I always say we're in a really, if you go into the world of editing, we're very, as a freelancer, we're in a really enviable position in some way, because there is a really big target market that has its hands raised. You know, like if you're a marketer, professional marketer, you have to go to the world and find people who need marketing services, but they could be anywhere. But if you're training to be a proofreader, or you're doing copy editing training, you know that there's one core market, and it is big, and we know that people like Shreeta and Becky and also like the TLC are looking for people who can support those services. So I made sure I was trained up. So I did my training with the Publishing Training Centre, and as a proofreader. And the first thing I did was think about my career, my educational background, because that's all I had. And I worked in publishing for a few years, but for a medical publisher, and in the marketing department. So I thought, well, I've got a politics degree, and I understand the language of social science, and I know some of those big author names, and I'm familiar with the terminology. So that's very much how I approached it when I contacted managing editors and project managers at publishers. I laid that out straight away and said, you know, I'm familiar with this language of the social sciences, and I targeted publishers who I knew had lists in the social sciences, and sort of found my good fit niche there. And I only started moving into fiction years later. That came about completely differently. But I did contact a few publishers and like HarperCollins and say, can I proofread some books for you? And they were like, thanks, but you know, we've got loads of people who want to do that. And so it was really about thinking about, where could I stand out? How could I make an impression, given that I had no experience? And that absolutely what Becky said. It was about sort of just feeding into those transferable skills, and what you said, Aki.
Well, we're talking about transferable skills, but interestingly, what's coming up a lot, which I'd already put down as a note, was especially this idea of specialisms. So I think often when we think of editors, and certainly when I talk to aspiring editors on this scheme and elsewhere, and people applying for jobs at TLC, when I say, what do you specialise in? They'll say, oh, I read you know, a lot of them will say, I read everything, as if that's somehow impressive. And unfortunately, it sometimes has the opposite effect. And people assume that specialisms will force you into a narrow corner, and that you can't possibly get enough work, that you might be almost typecast as a particular kind of editor. But I think there's a great power in specialism. And well, you know, I don't want to expound on that too much, but I'd love to hear your view on how you make that work for you. What's that? How you walk that fine line?
Me?
Any of you, actually. I mean,
Okay.
let's start with you, Louise, because you've done it. But then I'd like to hear, you know, especially from Shreeta and Becky, about when they're selecting people, and perhaps in your own editing experience, what you found around this topic.
So I actually think that the most appalling message you can send to a potential client is, I can do anything. Because when I hire, I don't want someone to come in who can do a little bit of plumbing and a little bit of electrical work, and I want a specialist plumber in my house. I want a specialist electrician. I want somebody who, and so I always think that when people come to me, they're looking for someone. They're looking for someone who works on novels, and they're looking for someone who can tell them what problems she solves, rather than me just going, yeah, I can do it all. Because I don't believe anybody who says they can do it all, because every one of us has strengths and weaknesses and passions and things we'd rather not do. And so I think it's such a strong selling point. And as soon as I strengthened my brand identity so that it reflected that passion and that specialist focus, I started to get, that's when I started to build a wait list. That's when I started to get more clients, and the right type of clients who weren't messing me around with payments, clients who were prepared to wait, because I often liken it to this. Those of you who work in fiction will have heard this phrase, show don't tell. And I always think it's a bit like that when you're a freelance editor, that you need to be showing your potential clients, whether they be publishers or agencies or packagers or indie authors, you need to be showing them your worth, not just telling them a list of like a shopping list of, like, I've got this course, because loads of people have got that stuff, and there is plenty of work in the market, but it's a competitive market. There are thousands and thousands of editors, and it's also an unregulated market. And so we need to do everything we can to build trust, particularly when people don't know us. So if you're trying to get work with any of you guys, me sort of turning up and going, you don't know me, you've never heard of me, but I want to do this, that's not going to set anybody's world on fire. Whereas if you can show that you're passionate about something, and you can show how that you understand the problems your potential clients have got, and that you know how to fix them, that starts to compel them, that starts to talk to them much more.
In fact, I'm going to then, off the back of that, ask quite a direct question now to both Shreeta and Becky, maybe a confronting question. What is it, because I know that you are both excellent editors, but what is it, do you think, that has made you the editor that you are? So Shreeta, let's start with you.
I think there's a couple of things. It's sort of back to the sort of thing of specialisms, but if you have a specialism, you're going to be in flow while you're doing the work, and you're going to be much more able to enter the mindset of the intended reader. So I think that counts for quite a lot. The other thing is, I guess, also understanding authors has been a huge help in understanding how to approach a problem and offer a solution that is neat, but that still keeps their voice and their intention in mind. And I suppose, having done the BuzzBar MA and literally verbally having to give my feedback quite regularly, helped me hone that a bit more. So I would say those things have helped.
That's fantastic. Becky, what makes you the editor you are?
I'm trying to think of something to say that's going to be useful. One of the things that I have done for many, many years is I've edited books about baby care and parenting. And I never did that until I had a baby. So if anyone out there is in that position, suddenly I was the expert in the office because I'd had one. I mean, I wasn't a midwife or anything like that.
Aspiring editors.
Exactly. I mean, suddenly, I know someone who's had one of those. So I probably for 10 years, I edited, if a book came out that was about feeding a baby or anything like that, I got it. And then I had a really strong sort of CV in that area. So you never know where these things are going to come from. Food is another huge area at the moment. And really, we only take on editors who only do food, because you want someone who really knows. They need to they have to be keen cooks. They have to know, well, that doesn't sound right. 100 grams of that would never be right. They have to know straight away, not just that it's spelt right, but that's logical. So that's where I've done quite well with editing. But as a general concept, I think personally, I'm quite entrepreneurial, and I think editing and publishing is a business. And I think having, business skills is incredibly useful, and that can come from all types of life. If you've been in marketing or anything like that, you're going to have transferable skills, and these books are out there to make money and to people want to buy them. So all of those things feed in. I hope that helps people out there. So yeah, entrepreneurial skills as well.
Great. So I think what we've been talking about really is knowing yourself well enough to understand which of your skills are the ones you want to lead with, which of those skills that you already have are transferable, which of the competencies relate directly to your editing, knowing your market, knowing the language of your market, knowing the readers of your market, and being a bit commercially savvy about your business, your brand, whether you are in-house or freelance. Actually, you are still within yourself some kind of a brand, some kind of a business, and knowing what you're offering and very clearly being able to articulate that is hugely valuable, because your skills are an asset, and the more you build on those with training through PTC or what's the new acronym? CIEP. Formerly, the artist formerly known as SFEP, now CIEP. Yes, know yourself, know your market, be commercially savvy, and be a little bit brutal, maybe. You've got to push, because it's extremely competitive, it's extremely difficult, and if you want to be the best, you've got to be serious about that. And as the director of TLC, we take editorial standards extremely seriously, and so we really respect and admire anybody like our amazing panelists and like you all listening today, who is going to take that career progression seriously and going to be honest and with themselves about what's possible. So we are all wishing you the best of luck. And Joe, I think this might be a brilliant moment to hand over to you, and you've got a sense now of people who've been contributing to the chat and asking questions. I don't know how we're going to do the Q&A.
We haven't really had any questions yet.
We haven't had any questions.
If anyone has any questions, now is your time to ask. I can't see that we've had any in the webinar chat on the right.
Have we had any? Oh, I'm not sure you can see the people raising their hands, so you're not able to see that. Joe?
I can't see that. No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Before we started the webinar, we did send out an email to participants saying if you wanted to contribute to the Q&A session to please raise your hand. Unfortunately, my Zoom function has completely glitched, so I am on my phone, we are making do, and the raise a hand function is not visible to us. So if you do have a question and you raised your hand to ask it, I'm very sorry that we missed that. Could you please use the chat function now to ask your burning questions while we have our expert panel here in the virtual room with us. There is no such thing as a stupid question on a forum like this, at an event like this, at a webinar like this, because guaranteed, whatever you're wondering and thinking, there'll be somebody else, there'll be at least one other person thinking it or wondering it or wanting to ask it. So now is the time.
Can I ask? Can I
yes,
just mention
certainly.
something on the back of what you just said, Aki? And it comes back down to that sort of entrepreneurial business spirit thing you were talking about. I always say that there are two things any of us need to know. There's the work we do, editing, and there's the work we do to get the work we do. And if any of you are listening are in training now, don't hold off in terms of thinking about your business planning, your marketing strategy, your website, what software you're going to need, any kind of support network you think you want to start thinking about that stuff now, rather, because what I've noticed in the past is that within chatting on editorial forums is that people go, well, I've done all my training, I haven't got any clients, and it's like they left. It was almost like they saw that stuff as an add-on, and it's not. It's part of being an editor. Unless you're being paid as an employee full time, if you're actually looking to get in front of the likes of you, Aki, and Shreeta and Becky, or some other agency or organization, then it's unlikely that they're going to come and find you. We have to go and find them, and that comes down to that bravery thing you talked about, that brutal thing, actually getting out there. However, and that's, a lot of people who go into editing are often maybe a little bit introverted even, and but you still have to do that stuff. You still have to get out there, and you have to make yourself visible some way or other. Otherwise, you're going to have all your lovely training behind you, but no work.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. That's really good advice. While we're waiting for the questions, if you are trying to think, where can I find, either apply for a job or find a freelance client, do spend some time looking at the really small companies. Certainly when I was at some of the bigger companies, we'd get a lot of CVs, but when I was working at a smaller company, for example, Carroll & Brown, they had about 30 members of staff, and were very good employers. I had never heard of them before I went to work for them. So you could do a lot of research into the small independents who could be fantastic clients, and offer you really good training. So if you just have a look on your own bookshelves or go for a wander in the library, also them are all allowed, you'll be amazed how many there are beyond the big 4 or 5.
The women's writing magazine Dyslexia does publish an annual indie publishers guide, which lists most, I think, of the independent publishers in the UK, and also Salt Publishing have an interactive map. If you look for Salt Publishing independent publishers, they have an interactive map where you can see where in the country they are. So if you're thinking of working not just remotely, but maybe in person, or wanting some work experience somewhere, that map should be really useful to show you where near where you live there are indie publishers who might want a hand, and you can get some experience there. We have some questions in on the Q&A. People are finding the Q&A function on their screens, which is brilliant. Joe, would you like to take can you see those?
Yeah, I can start asking those. Also, just a quick thing, Alia is saying that she is able to see the gallery view. I don't know if that's something you can administer just before you go any further.
No, the gallery and the speaker view is participants. It's not a host.
Yeah,
question,
she knows that. It doesn't seem to be working for her. I'm not quite sure why. Well,
if you're accessing on your phone, you should be able to scroll to the right, and that will change the view you have of the screen. If you're on a laptop or PC, the view is on the top right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. But you are able to control the screen that you see. So you want speaker view, gallery view, not speaker view, and that will enable you to see everyone at once. So if you're on a phone, scroll to the right. If you're on your PC or laptop, please go to the top right-hand corner and click on gallery view. Joe, if you want to try and sort that out in the chat, I'm going to go through. Shall I start going through the questions?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
so we have, and I'm very sorry that you're not able to ask these in video format. I do apologise, but we will get through all of the questions here. So our first question is from Marika De Silva, who says, she says, thank you, Becky and Teresa, for all your advice. It's been so helpful. I do have a question for Louise. Thank you so much for the advice you've given so far. I wanted to ask how to make the transition from a social science kind of editor to fiction. And maybe this applies to anybody who's working in a particular specialism and going into another, but this is specifically a switch to fiction.
So I think that there is other stuff you need to be aware of that Denise Cowell, my podcast host, and I always laugh about the fact that when we talk about various different aspects of editing, the sentence level stuff usually, and we start, and she's a non-fiction editor and I'm a fiction editor, and sometimes we just look at each other and go, you have to do that? And so I do think there's other stuff you need to know. I have a course, a webinar and a book and some supporting materials called Switching to Fiction. It's about 30 quid. And it's specifically aimed at people who want to make the shift, and it covers the things that just don't tend to come up if they might come up with some creative non-fiction, sorry, I put the emphasis wrong there, with some creative non-fiction, but most of them are they're specific to fiction. So it's unlikely that if you're copy editing politics books that you would need to worry about viewpoint. I can't imagine why you would need to worry about, but I think even as a sentence level editor, even though I would consider that a sort of more of a shaping thing, you're going to, if you want to work at a line level with authors, you need to know what narrative viewpoint is and how it works. That's just one example. You need to know how dialogue, the sort of conventions about how dialogue is laid out. You need to understand how tense might work, and how the rhythm and flow of a text might differ with different genres. So that's, and the reason I put that together, because I didn't really feel like I had that same question, I guess, and I didn't really know the answer to it, other than just like, well, dip your foot in the water and see. And I don't, and that it's tricky, because you don't know what you don't know. And so when I moved into fiction editing, I did it via proofreading. I ended up via word of mouth. One of my publishing clients moved from an academic position into a fiction company, and then I think she didn't have any work for me, but she recommended me to a mate, and so I started getting more fiction proofreading work, but that was quite a strict remit. And then as I started working for indie authors, I realized that I was seeing stuff that felt a bit off, but I wasn't really sure what the problem is. And so the next thing I did was I bought a load of craft books, and I just started reading and looking at how what I was learning from those books was fitted with what I was seeing from mainstream authors that I liked, and where I felt the writing was good quality. And I kind of condensed all of that and put it into switching to fiction. So the first thing you might want to do is take a look on my website. Sorry, I don't want this to be like an advert, but at least you can have a look at what the syllabus is and what I cover, and see if that might help. And because there isn't, to my knowledge, any formal training that other than that takes you from that helps you make that transition, and it isn't just a case of, you do need to do more than just have a go. I think you need to understand what else you need to know.
Yeah, and we're looking into that as well, because I think there is, like you say, it's an unregulated market, and I think we're thinking about ways that we can help with that infrastructure. So keep eyes peeled. We've got a question from Adam Steiner. Thank you, Adam, for submitting your question. He says, how does the relationship work between editorial teams and an author's agent? It seems that agents can also work as early stage advisors or editors. Good question, Adam. Becky or Shreeta, does one of you want to take that?
I'm not sure that I'm as well placed, actually. I mean, I know that we often, the author's agent will always be CC'd on all correspondence, and they will, jump in and advise on things if that's needed. But maybe Becky has a fuller answer.
Yeah, maybe Becky, if I think possibly the questions around kind of, I'm imagining if an agent has done work on it, will that be communicated to you at the point that the work is submitted, more in your role, I guess, as a commissioning editor in this case? And then how does that work with an agent having an editorial vision? Does that disappear the moment it comes up to your desk, or how does that work?
Becky, I think you're muted, actually.
Oh. So is Joe.
Unmute. Oh. There we go. Sorry, is that better?
There we go. Yeah,
there you go. Yep.
Oh, it's because I went to plug in my phone. So certainly in my experience, the agent would do the editing before they even try to sell the book. So if you're lucky enough to be an author and you have an agent, and the agent thinks you need work, they would do that with you, and that's fiction or non-fiction. Some very high profile agents don't have time. They only take on books that are in really good condition. Some will put a lot of effort in. Then a commissioning editor buys it. They might then want to do something structural. I would say at that point, it depends on how confident the author is. The author might say, no more changes, or yes, I'm grateful for any suggestions. It's a dialogue. So those can be quite structural things. And that's before it gets to a copy editor. And it depends on the relationship. The agent is meant to be the author's advocate at all times, but they also want to sell the book. So, you know, there's always a dialogue and a tussle, you know, in all these situations.
Absolutely. And always room for a more editorial opinion, because an author will really go through lots and lots and lots and lots of rounds. And a good agent, remember, will be really fighting the writer's corner. So they might have had to do some editorial, but they'll know when to pass it on, and they will also be working with the author to liaise with all of the relevant editorial and wider teams at the publishing house, just to make sure the author is being looked after, their editorial vision isn't being skewed in any way, because that is also important. And somebody earlier mentioned, or Shreeta, you mentioned keeping the author's intention in mind at all times, and I think every good editor will do that, and every editorial team will work together to do that. Another question here from Rose Green. Thank you, Rose, for your question. She asks, how do you recommend getting in touch with managing editors or the equivalent in-house? Is there a resource, or is it a case of just networking more than anything else?
That is a good question. As you'll know, publishing websites don't really give very much away. And if you went on to, say, the Penguin website, you would have to work really hard to find the names of staff members. And it's a bit of a shame, because actually quite a lot of them would be quite happy to hear from you, but they're not easy to get hold of. There isn't an easy answer. I mean, you can send something in and say to the managing editor of Vermilion or whatever, and it will probably get to them. Whether or not they reply, I don't know, but you could certainly just try that. Twitter is actually a really good resource for you having, you know, following various companies and networking in that way. If they're chatting away on Twitter in their lunch break, they're probably quite approachable. It's not a bad method. Give it a go.
Yeah, I think you have to be a bit careful with Twitter, but lots of people are really active and really happy to be approached, probably with a nice public tweet rather than with a long, earnest DM.
Yeah,
I would assume.
yeah.
But if you look up, say, managing editor and then whatever publishing house, and you can filter by people on Twitter, you can see who's out there. And it's networking, I think, works if it's forming authentic connections. So you're not, it's not a means to an end. You're not targeting one specific person because you've got one specific job in mind. But there are other ways to network that keep you at a safe enough distance that you're basically community building. So attending events where you can, keeping on top of news through places like the bookseller, the publishing industry's main source of news. You can see who's closing deals, you can see who's commissioning work, you can get names, and so even if you are sending to, you know, some nameless inbox, if you then can address, you know, for the attention of under name, it will probably get to that person. So there are ways to do that.
When I first started out, go ahead, Shreeta.
I was just going to add onto that, just to say that if you see that a book has been commissioned and, for example, you share a similar background to the narrator of the work or something like that, that's often a good way of getting a foot in the door by saying, I have this specialist knowledge about this or that, and, you know, I feel like I could be a good freelancer for you. That's another way around it. It's just it's something specific and tangible for the editor to.
Well, actually, one of our questions is really related to that, Shreeta, so maybe we can continue that with Ejre's question. And Ejre asks, she says, thank you very much for this panel. Could your niche that we've been talking about this panel as an editor be something like knowing a foreign language or editing English translations from that specific language? Or at that stage, the editor is viewing the translation, would this be irrelevant? So I guess this is quite a specific question, but also around specialism relating to language.
Yeah, there are lots.
I would say so.
Language publishers, foreign language publishers, there are travel publishers. There are agencies, aren't there? Translation agencies that could take you in different directions. I'm trying to think, when we've had books translated, we do go via agencies. But I know, you know, if for example, you're interested in publishing careers and you are fantastic at languages, rights is an area I think people don't always realise that they can get involved with. And it's incredibly creative, and you're very much involved in the process of creating books, as well as obviously selling them to different publishers. So rights is an area to explore.
Well, actually, a really good tip as well is that lots of people think they want to be an editor, but actually really properly exploring all of those different departments, all of those different jobs that exist within those departments, and comparing them to your skill set. I think sometimes we assume we want to edit because we love books, and sometimes that's not necessarily where our skills are best aligned. And so Penguin Random House has a department list. If you go to their website, and you can find a department list, and it's just a really good blueprint for these are the different moving parts of a typical publishing house. And, you know, everything from kind of IT rights all the way up to all sorts of things that you might not have heard of. Do have a look there as well. Just keep an open mind. I think people sometimes come into trouble, you know, shifting, assuming they can get any way into publishing and then shift over to editing eventually. And that can be quite difficult. As much as transferable skills are valuable, if you go into any department and then you but really your heart's set on editing, that transfer isn't always as easy as it sounds. This one was specifically about English translations from a particular language that the person has knowledge of. There is the Literary Translation Centre as well. The British Literary Translation Centre, I can't remember what it's called, but that could be a place to look. Remember that places that aren't publishing houses or indie authors also need editors. You know, websites, content creators are also always looking for editors with the right qualifications. So have a look there if you have a particular specialism, right? We've got some more questions coming in, so I want to make sure we get through them. I want to do them in order of how when they came in, just to be
Aki, just to interrupt again,
yes.
Sorry. Apparently, if you switch yours to gallery mode, everyone else can see gallery mode. If you're able to do that, that would be really helpful.
I can't move away. I don't know how to. If I switch mine to gallery mode.
If you put your phone in gallery mode, if possible,
It is in
everyone
gallery
else.
mode. It is.
It is. Okay, then that should mean that everyone else should be able to see it. Yeah, that's working. Apparently, that's working.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt again, but can you?
Sorry,
yeah. And we can see your video again now.
Okay, I can't get to the questions now.
I can ask the questions.
Would you? Yeah. Would you?
I think it's more important everyone can see. So okay, so I'll jump in with some more questions. So what have we had?
Was one at the bottom from
Manveer,
Natasha about how closely do you check the freelancers' work, which I thought was interesting.
Oh yes.
For Shreeta and Becky.
I check very closely. I check absolutely everything. I'll get the proofs back, I'll collate them, I'll decide what goes, you know, what is pertinent and what isn't. So I check incredibly closely. Yeah, and I do notice when people's attention slackens. I mean, one of the big tips I have is about stamina. When you're proofreading or copy editing something, keep going. Last lines, end of paragraphs, end of chapters, end of the book, because a lot of editors' attention tends to slacken around the last third of the book. So that's where I'll be paying particular attention. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I think if I've worked with someone for many, many years, I might relax a little bit. But yeah, it's always, you need as many pairs of eyes as possible. And it's always quite satisfying when you suddenly think, oh, I'm really tired, it's lunchtime, and you think, oh, I've just spotted something. And it is a reminder that, yeah, you can easily miss things. And so, yeah, I do check everything. Yeah, and it's not you'll spot it eventually. You don't want to spot it when it's all been printed. So. Yeah.
One thing I used to do when I worked for publishers was I used to sort of mix up I made sure that the last thing I was doing wasn't proofreading. I would have a final set of checks, like maybe sort of like specific, like maybe a layout check, so that the last thing wasn't sort of like logic or sense or spellings, you know, because of that thing, of that winding down thing you get into. I'm on the last chapter, I can relax. I'd have something sort of quite technical to do at the end, so that I kind of shifted myself out of that mindset. And sometimes mixing up the order you do things and not trying to do everything at once can be really helpful, because you know that your managing editor with their beady eyes is going to be, because as a freelancer as well, you're only as good as your last job.
Yeah, I've just proofread a book for Penguin, and they actually had 2 proofreaders look at it because it was such a big budget book for them. So they know we're human, and so if they can afford it, they do that. And I did think, oh no, they're bound to spot something I've missed, and vice versa. That's why they're paying us. That's okay.
Yeah. Do you know, but years ago, I proofread the sort of, I think it was some special anniversary edition of James Herbert had died, the horror writer, and Constable and Robinson, was it Little Brown? I can't remember. Anyway, they brought out a special edition of the Rats, and asked me to proofread it, and that must have been in its billionth edition by the time I got to it. And I thought they were kind of like, just do a top and tail, and I found the protagonist's name was spelt wrong. That had been through like just one little typo that had lasted for years, proof after proof after proof. And so I did virtually nothing on it, but I was so proud of this one error that I found. So
this is why we're geeks, we're complete geeks, aren't we?
Yeah. But nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
This is a really interesting question that Zoe has just asked. Thank you, Zoe, for your question. She says, it seems there's been a shift away from print to digital in recent years, especially within non-fiction educational publishing. So that's a kind of statement in and of itself. Does this impact on our skills and role as an editor? And if so, how best can we equip ourselves to keep ahead of that trend or changing trends? I guess it's a question about digital versus print.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
It's a tricky one.
The same. Yeah, I think the content still has to be right, whether it's going to be printed on paper or printed or on the screen. So I have noticed more recently, it's a sort of other way around. Very recently, I would be sent a stack of paper to proofread, and now we're doing it digitally. So we'll be marking up PDFs at home. So you do need to learn how to do that as an editor. But in answer to the question, the work still has to be correct. The content still has to be correct. At Bloomsbury, when a book was published to an ebook format, we would check it again, because you can still get glitches, or, like Louise was saying about top and tailing, weird things can still pop in. So we would do another check. We would do a book check, and we would do a digital check. So twice as many checks, if that helps.
Okay. Interesting.
In terms of actual skills that you could learn with marking up particular types of digital text, I know that the Publishing Training Centre does offer, they have these e-learning modules, so they're not full courses, but they're little bite-sized skills-based training you can do, and I do think they have a variety of digital offers and options there.
That sounds a good option.
Yeah, you do need to, at a minimum, I think you need to be comfortable working with a PDF, particularly if you're going to be proofreading, but still on sort of like digital hard copy in effect. That it's post design is, I guess, is what I'm saying. You're not dealing with raw text and actually amending directly. And if you're going to be, it doesn't matter whether you're, which clients you're working for. I think you need to get your head around Word, get the best out of Word, because Microsoft Word is amazing, but it can be even more amazing if you really know how to sort of use various tools and stuff with it. And so I know that's kind of off the question a bit, but thinking about digital skills, yeah.
Okay, great. Another question from Manvir. Manvir says, this is a bit of a broad question, but what advice do you have for someone who's trying to make a leap from a completely different career, in his case as a network engineer?
I think about your transferable skills, because I was sort of project managing an awful lot in my previous role, which was in television, and I worked as a market researcher, and that you can see when you think about it the link between the two, because I was very dedicated to detail focused work, and that translated over, as did the sort of project management side of things. So it's just getting creative about thinking about what you have to offer, and also the maturity that you'll have had from having worked in another field for some time really does count for a lot, I think.
And think about the different types of editing and what kind of editor you might like to be, and then see what training's available. So the PTC and the CIEP both offer in the UK. They're the two biggest that I can think of. They're the two they're two of the biggest training providers in terms of sort of like, you know, big bodies, and just not because I think that having a list of qualifications is the most important thing, but because I think it was only I learnt to proofread via the Publishing Training Centre, and it's there that I learnt what I didn't know. That was more important almost than the stuff I did know. And so making yourself fit for market and giving yourself confidence about going to market and contacting potential clients and offering your services, you'll feel in a much stronger position to do that if you know. Because I think if I just thought, oh, I'm good at spelling and grammar, and I'd contacted Shreeta or Becky, they would have kind of looked at a sample of my work and gone, no, you don't know how to do this. You don't know how to proofread in the way we want you to proofread. And so you need to, so doing a sort of comprehensive, sort of doing some research into the right kind of training course that's going to fill your skills gap so that you're fit to do the kind of work they want. Because if you are proofreading designed page proofs for a publisher, typo hunting isn't enough, is it, guys? You know, you're gonna want more than that from us. You're going to expect us to notice dodgy indents and inconsistent running heads and all sorts of stuff. So so training.
Yeah, I agree with everyone else. I would say that also, you know, I know we're here to talk about being an editor, but publishing has more to it than that as well. I mean, some of the most senior people I've worked with have come from marketing backgrounds, from sales backgrounds, from all sorts of areas, logistics. And I will say they're often far better paid than the editors, and they have huge impact on the business. They're the ones sitting around the board table saying, no, we're not going to buy that book, however much you like it. We want to do this book. So you can have a really amazing creative career if you're bringing in other skills as well. So, and you will have a lot of impact on which books get bought. You know, if you're the logistics expert. So, you know, think broadly as well.
Well, it's also thinking about the change that you want to make in the world of books, and is the answer provided by being an editor, or is it something else? And Becky, you were talking earlier about entrepreneurial skills, and I know several people who we've seen go through training in a previous round and a pilot round of this, a couple of whom set up their own micro businesses because they realised that actually what they wanted to do was make books. And editing is one part of making books. It isn't actually the be all and end all of making books. And if you're happy to be that person who's in the detail of it, that's fantastic. But if through doing this you realise that your interests lie elsewhere, please allow yourselves to have that revelation, and to go through, you know, allow yourselves going through training and realising it's not for you. That's absolutely fine. And actually this relates, we've got a question from Victoria, who I think we've partly answered, hopefully, Victoria, your question, but please ask again if it hasn't answered it. She's also said, like you, Shreeta, she has a background of in television research, specifically in production, and also 5 years running a catering business. And she's wondering, would I be the kind of person you'd welcome a cold call or CV from? I've no idea where to start when I finish my PTC course, but I would love to work on non-fiction. So hopefully, Victoria, we've sort of answered that. And in relation to that, we've got another question which kind of ties in from Marika. Hello again, Marika, who and Victoria, hopefully this also responds to your question in a more fulsome way. What skills do you think an aspiring editor needs to develop if they're just starting out, apart from technical skills? Because we've been talking about courses and training. Aside from technical skills, are there any skills that you think are particularly valuable for a first time an aspiring editor just starting out?
For I think that might also depend on whether who you're working for.
I would say that,
can we expand?
You go first, Becky. Sorry, I've got you covered up.
Sorry. No, I'm just not. I was just thinking about the question about someone who mentioned catering skills. You'd be amazed how many people apply to, when I was working at HarperCollins doing sort of celebrity cookbooks, people didn't really demonstrate they knew anything about food. So actually, don't assume that we know that you like food. I mean, go for it. Say that you've done catering and what that was, if you did supper clubs, whatever it is. These are all actually really useful, and you can tailor your CV to the jobs you're applying for, and really think about, what do these people actually publish? What is their thing? You know, if you're into fashion, if you're into photography, or you're an ex-primary school teacher, or whatever it is incredibly useful. And just more broadly on skills that aren't technical, being able to have a brilliant phone conversation. You know, it's far better sometimes to pick up the phone and talk to an author about something than endless emails and the tone gets lost. So I think that's something that maybe people could, you know, value. Being able to chat to an author who's come to the building, and you're showing them into the building and making them feel welcome, really sets the tone and impression. It sounds lightweight, but it isn't. It's about making them feel valued and listened to. So all of those skills, you know, I always think drama students from university are actually really good at that stuff, because they'll talk to anybody. And I quite like those personalities. I think that all of that's really helpful. If you've done a bit of amateur dramatics, I quite like it on a CV, to be honest. It shows you can talk to people.
But it's also, I think, what actors do really well. They have to embody a character. They have to have deep empathy, and actually, editor, a good editor, even if a very difficult, challenging, tough editor, and often they're the best ones, will even if they're very brutal with their edits, will have a deep understanding and a deep empathy for what the author is trying to achieve, and they will understand they are trying to get them to the best version of that book, of that project, of that website, of that copy that they possibly can. So a deep
I absolutely endorse that communication. We might call that communication, just sort of broadly, that being able to respect the fact that the and when a client hires you, whether they're a publisher or whether they're an indie author, they've chosen you to work on a book, and so you have to and you have to respect that. And if you're working directly with the author, you have to respect that the risk that they took with you as well. So I always think it's not just about making sure that your written skills as well. I always think that report writing is just as important in community, so that the clients don't just understand, that they understand not just what they can see in front of them in terms of what's happened with the edit, that they understand the why of the edit. And it's important that we communicate, rather than just like, this is it, it's better now. Now I've done my thing. They need to know why it's better. Like, why didn't that work? And so that they understand why because otherwise it's like calling their baby fat, and nobody wants to be told their baby's fat, even if their baby is fat.
This is a bit of a soundbite from this webinar.
You have to be so diplomatic, and I think if you've done writing yourself, that's actually incredibly helpful. If you've written something and had a friend critique it and know what it feels like, that's really good training. And you'll be amazed. You think, oh, it's fine, I'm totally resilient. And then someone says, oh, I didn't really get that. And you know how it feels. And that's quite useful as well, to go through that process.
One other thing I thought of that's sort of an extra skill, if you like, or an extra sort of piece of learning you can do, is I think it's always worth it if you know you're going to be working for a publisher or a group of publishers or particular clients, even if they're indie clients, then familiarize yourself with the style guides you're most likely to be using. So I always have physical or digital copies of Newhart's Rules and Chicago Manual of Style, because I find them really useful just for sort of good common sense guidance. But when I used to work freelance doing social science proofreading, I was often asked to make sure that references and were cited according to APA style. And so being familiar with how APA style works it really helped make me more efficient. So it's worth, when you are doing your research into which, you know, the various types of clients you want to work with, thinking about what kind of backup tools you might want to start looking at. And I'm not saying you have to know Chicago Manual of Style word for word, you know, that, but actually just sort of getting a sense of what those resources have got to offer, and the kind of thing that the kind of guidance they're offering, so that because that's another thing potentially you could go to, say, a social science publisher with, and you can say, you know, like I've got copies of these style guides, I know how they work, and I know the importance of working according to house style, whether you've got your own.
Yeah, it's professionalizing your practice, and also showing that you know the language of the market, again, as we discussed before. We've got quite a few more questions to get through. There's one which is, can anyone recommend an editing proofreading 101 course? We are working in partnership here with the Publishing Training Centre, who we've mentioned, hopefully enough for our partners. Hello, Jill, I know that you're listening. And do look on the Publishing Training Centre website and the Chartered Institute for Editing and Proofreading for those. So I think we can kind of dismiss that answer, but if you want specific recommendations, get in touch with us afterwards. As I say, we will share this recording and disseminate it to you, so you can have follow-up questions. I'll give you the possibility of writing to us with any follow-up questions. And we've got 3 left that I think, because we want to try and wrap up on time. I know that we've all got other things to be doing in quarantine. So we've got a question from Robert about in-house, a question from Adam about markets, and a question from Huria about language. So let's start with the one about in-house. I'm just aware we want to get through all of them. Robert says, obviously, I expect there to be some variation depending on company and size, but generally, does the amount of hands-on editing you actually get to do tend to decrease or not the higher up the editorial career ladder you go?
Yeah,
I don't
think in-house working.
Do you want to do that one, Shreeta?
No, I mean, I think this is more from the managing editor perspective, and I think Becky will be able to broaden this out. But actually, from that point of view of being a managing editor, I don't think it does. You still get to do a lot of hands-on work. You just have more expertise, and you can probably do it more efficiently. You might be dividing that time a bit more with managing processes as well as managing certain authors. But actually, certainly in Puffin, you know, you have a lot of big name authors the higher up you get, and you get to do very meaty, interesting work. But I suspect it's different in different companies, and I think Becky might be able to say more about the other side of it, the commissioning side as well.
I think it does vary between companies. So for example, at Bloomsbury, if you were commissioning a book, it would depend on the author. Some of them would really only want to work with the person who'd commissioned them, and they would very much look after them, depending on who that person was. I would, in a book recently at Penguin, I would say the commissioning editor only really made very broad suggestions. So recently the editor said, we need a chapter on this, and said, can we have a chapter on this? And the author then had to go away and write that chapter. She didn't make any other changes. It was then handed to me, and we did the more sort of line by line editing. So it really does depend on the project, on that particular department, how busy they are, the relationship with the individual author. If you want to train someone up as well, you might have a junior member of staff and you think they need to do this. So we're going to keep it in-house, or that one, no, that can go to a freelancer. So there's quite a lot of flexibility. On the whole, I would say a large company tends to be more set in its ways. If you're in a small company, you might have more variety. You might have to do all sorts, and it can be a really good way to learn the business, being in a small company, because you have those close relationships with other departments. I mean, you're on the same floor for a start, rather than 3 floors up and never seeing them. So
Although
pros and cons.
Yeah, and what I would add is that I think a lot of people going in for assistant editor, or editorial assistant positions, the very first entry level role, some people make the mistake of assuming that they'll immediately get to work on loads and loads of text, and actually any entry level role across any department tends to be quite admin heavy. And certainly when we're looking at entry level role CVs, admin skills honestly come above the I'm really well versed in literary fiction, I'm brilliant at grammar. So don't forget to focus on your really basic admin skills. Don't underestimate them, don't underrate them. They are absolutely critical if you are wanting to work in-house across any department. Huri has got a really interesting question, which is, how should editors approach work or language that they think is likely to be harmful or problematic when published, both when working for a publisher and independently? Is this something we should be concerned about?
Great question.
Fantastic question.
So I'll take the independent thing from my perspective. So I suppose the first thing is, like, your definition of what might be harmful or problematic is always going to be blurry, because we live in a country where there's free speech, and so some of the things that we might not like still might be they're not illegal. And so I think that editors working independently have to first of all draw their own lines in their heads. So what kind of stuff will you work on? Are there certain things that you think might be triggering, or that you might just find so upsetting or frustrating or annoying, that you don't want to work on them? And as an independent editor, you have the right to do that. You have the right to decline to work on a project, but you do have to kind of use your own personal instinct a bit. I mean, if something's overtly racist, that the law it already covers this to a degree, and so if something's racist or illegal, I won't touch it. But I've never actually been approached. For me, the issue has come around, the sort of blurriness has come with, say, adult material, for example. So I might get offered stuff that I might decide to work on, but the other editors would say, no, I don't want anything to do with that. And so I think you have to start out with if you're a freelance editor, you have to start out with a set of your own kind of rules, if you like, about what kind of material you are prepared to publish and where your own boundaries are. Bit different if you work in-house, though, potentially.
I did turn down a book, a novel recently that I just thought was really sexist. I just really didn't like it, so I just said I was busy. But that in-house, by the time it's got to an editor, it's probably been through the commissioning editor and maybe even the legal department. If it's pretty dodgy, they'll have made that decision. Places like HarperCollins have big legal departments, so if there's going to be anything problematic, they will be all over it. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure, if you're really not comfortable with doing something, you can just make a good excuse or raise it if it's more problematic, as Louise said.
Well, if you're working freelance, you can also write something into your T's and C's that gives you discretion not to work with clients, just so that's really transparent from the off. And there's normally a clause somewhere, if you're working freelance, if you have T's and C's, which you should, which are really helpful for the client, but also to understand where they stand with you. Normally you can have a little clause about excessively offensive material, but you won't accept it. That leaves it broad enough that it's at your discretion to refuse to work with certain types of work. Where it's trickier, I think, and where we do a lot of work at TLC thinking about this in the wider industry, is where it's not necessarily illegal, but it might be an unpalatable view. And unpalatable to a certain extent is subjective, but there are some things that I think the industry should no longer tolerate, not even in the defence of free speech, because we're talking about power structures that are systemically imbalanced, and that we can't anymore talk about free speech if if certain power structures are in place and certain communities who have historically suffered oppression continue to be subject to lampooning or cliche or stereotyping, that I think is no longer tolerable, nor should be in the indie or in-house publishing world. This is really its own webinar, and we could talk about all sorts of things, including the use of sensitivity readers. I think if you're working freelance, be extremely careful that you are making a clear line between this work that risks being read as offensive versus telling a client you are offensive or you are writing this, you know. But just be very clear that you're always dealing with the work and not the client. Don't get yourself into a dangerous situation. Be extremely mindful and vigilant and respectful, and know when that you have to draw your line. I feel like we can't go into as much detail as I'd like about that, because it's a really thorny topic, but one that I think the industry needs to have a wider conversation about. I'm aware of time. I want to wrap us up on a positive note. So we've got a final question here from Adam, who asks, relative to desired market for each book, do you always try to read or edit with the ideal reader in mind, or do you try to go with your own instincts first of what will make the book the best it can be? Adam, I think we've sort of said we want to try and make the book the best it can be, but I would like to round up with hopefully a related question, which is about, you know, being a good editor, what it means to be a good editor. So we've talked a lot about, you know, our panelists' career progression, transferable skills, market, commercial viability, business sense, all sorts of things. And I did want to round up, hopefully this will be useful, just one kind of top tip. I did ask my panelists to prepare this earlier, but it may have changed in the course of our conversation. Just one sort of top tip for the aspiring editors out there. As I say, this will be recorded, and we will on Twitter and on social media invite further questions. We do need to draw things to a close, so I'm hoping a top tip from our amazing panelists will be a good way to round out this webinar.
I can go, which is just to say that read really widely and read things that are not published if you can, because I think what's really useful is, as an editor, is being able to explain why something isn't working and articulate it to yourself and then articulate it to the author. If you can do that, if you can really work hard to work out what isn't quite working and the reasons why, then you're always going to be able to efficiently work through the problems that texts can present, and that's invaluable.
I'll offer a more technical thing, because we've kind of talked about, when I put together my top tips, we've kind of covered them all. I wanted to talk more specifically about, particularly if you're looking at working in the non-publisher market, and think about your website. A lot of editors' websites are like shopping lists of boring stuff that talk about a lot of skills, but it's all me. Always bear your client in mind. Like, I always try to make everything on my website focused around, how is this, like, if it's on a web page on my site, it needs to be showing how I'm solving a client's problem. And if it doesn't do that, then I need to think about whether it should be there. So when you build your online presence and you build that shop front, think about solving your clients' problems rather than just showing off.
That's such good advice. My tip is, if you are looking for a job, if you're looking to get into book publishing or change career, really do your research. I think we've already talked about it, into the small publishers as well. That I think they're a really good place for you to learn the business and to learn what all the other departments do, and you get to talk to more people. So certainly when I was working at Bloomsbury and HarperCollins and Penguin, we used to get so many CVs for work experience, hundreds. Whereas when I worked at Carroll & Brown, we hardly got any. So anyone who wanted work experience got it, and you know, they did very well, and they could progress on to other companies as well. So looking to the smaller companies as well.
Fabulous. Those are amazing top tips. I seem to have muted Shreeta by accident. Apologies. And it just remains me to say thank you so much to all of you out there who have joined us. I'm sorry that I can't see all of your lovely faces. I do hope that this webinar has been some help to the aspiring editors out there. This was the Literary Consultancy's first attempt at a webinar, so we hope you've enjoyed yourselves and that this has worked, and we are hoping to programme more of these in the coming months as we all stay at home and get used to this new way of working and this new way of life, in fact. Massive thanks to our panellists, to Shreeta and to Becky and to Louise. Do have a look at all of their work that they're doing and the publishers that they represent. Thank you also to Jo for stepping in when things were glitching at the beginning. You've been
I didn't do that much.
And thank you to thank you to Rosie and Michelle, our interpreters for the evening. I really appreciate you coming on board and doing some pretty ad hoc interpreting of a ranging conversation. You've been heroes. And a big thanks to all of you for joining us. We've been the Literary Consultancy. This has been part of the editing training scheme that we are running with the Publishing Training Centre, all about training up aspiring editors and spreading the word about editorial values, because that is exactly what TLC stands for. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I am going to end this webinar, and in good time we will send you the files, the audio files, and hopefully continue this conversation. Thank you so much for being there.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.